now. So what's happening today? For room rules, just some polite requests from our side. Please have your microphones on mute, please. Have your cameras off except when asking questions. And if you do see something that you'd like to comment on or bring our attention to, please do use the raising hands feature. Reduce the background noise is important because, again, the session is being recorded to be used as a resource for others who want to explore open education. The session is recorded. Use the chat feature to enter questions, and these questions will be engaged with at the end of the presentation, which is about 40 minutes in length. Follow-up questions may be sent to myself, to Kelly, or to Mlungisi, and our email addresses to do so are in the chat window. So, welcome attendees, and I will give you a brief introduction to the series called Influencing with Open Education, which is an online webinar series presented by the Open Education Influencers here at the LT CoLab at Nelson Mandela University. These informative and often practical series of weekly Zoom sessions provide attendees opportunities to gain more in-depth understanding of open education, of open educational resources, which shortened to OER, and open practices. Here, you will hear directly from open practitioners in South Africa and abroad, seeking to support improved access to education and the resources required for teaching and learning, or learning and teaching is our new focus at Nelson Mandela University, while aiming to enhance the effectiveness of learning and teaching interventions. The series of webinars also directly engage with the hows of finding open textbooks and other open educational resources in specific disciplines, while exploring open licenses and the reduction in barriers to sharing and using content. I'd like to give a special welcome to our presenter for the day. Her name is Andrea Niosi, who has an MBA from the University of British Columbia and has been teaching undergraduate marketing at Kwantlen Polytechnic University since 2008. Andrea began writing an open textbook on consumer behavior in 2017. She engages in open pedagogy practices with her students by supporting their efforts in creating renewable and publishable work to supply the public domain with underrepresented voices and examples in marketing. Her session today is titled An Introduction to Open Pedagogy. And without further ado, can I hand over to Andrea?
Great, thank you, Gino. Good morning. Well, good morning from Vancouver. I am actually very much in the dark here, and I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen with you and start to present. All right, so I'm sorry, it's just going to take me a moment here to of course, this is going to not go without some sort of a glitch. Gino, if I give you the link, would you be able to open up the presentation on your side?
I'm happy to try. Would you like to send it in the chat window, perhaps?
Sure, I will do that, yeah. And I would make the presentation available to everyone anyways. This is a fun fact about working in Canada. I actually am not allowed to use Zoom. And so I don't have this set up on my computer, so it doesn't run very easily here. And I don't have my share screen option set up, so I apologize for this. This is not a very clean start to the day. Okay, let me get that for you.
That's okay. Just a quick notice to the attendees that it is 4 a.m. on your side. So we are,
It is.
we are just grateful that you are able to join us, and thanks once again. I will see what I can do on this.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, are you able to see that link there?
I do see it, and I will try and share my screen right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
You see this?
There we go. Yep, that's great. And in fact, I see a few of the attendees are also on the PowerPoint or on the Google Slides here. So that's great. So you can have a look at your leisure. There's also a few links in there. So I did mean for everybody to have a copy of this anyways. So Gino, if you don't mind, I will ask you to go through the slides on my behalf, and
I'm
I will
happy to
let you
do
know.
so. Just tell me next slide and I will do it. I am
Will
muting
do.
now.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, good morning, or I guess good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for this rough start. Anyways, I'm really happy to be here to talk about open pedagogy with all of you. And this is a topic really near and dear to my heart, and it's an area of work that I've been immersed in for the last couple of years. As Gino mentioned, I began this open journey with the start of an open textbook in consumer behavior. I teach marketing, undergrad marketing at Kwantlen, which is on the west coast of Canada. And in starting my open textbook project, I saw there was great opportunity to engage with students beyond just providing an open resource to them, but actually working with students to explore what they could bring to such an endeavor. And in fact, I was delighted to see that students had a lot to offer in helping to shape our open resources and to really give them voice and to bring their experiences to the classroom. All right, so let's move on a little bit here. We'll go on to the next slide. And, you know, a nice way to frame our discussion around open pedagogy is to look at the work of Paulo Freire. And I'll let you take a second to read this on your own. But what I think is really important to focus on here is some of the language used and thinking about the relationship that we have with students. And this is where I like to dwell in my experience as an instructor, is really thinking about that whole idea of looking at students as just merely containers, empty containers to be filled by the teacher. And when we look at this relationship, we really see the flaw in all of this, because it really suggests that students don't have value and lived experience when they come into the classroom and they come into a course. And in fact, it's such a flawed experience because it assumes that we as instructors or teachers, professors, are the ones who are all the knowledge holders, and that everything we have to say should be consumed by our students. So this banking concept of education is really one that has helped shape my approach to looking at or re-examining how to build that relationship with students. So moving on to our next slide, we can sort of see a visual representation here where the traditional form of education really looks at students as these empty vessels. Really, they don't bring value to the classroom. They have little to share. They come with little knowledge, and that all of that is within our, that is what we provide. But open pedagogy, of course, really not only recognizes, but respects what that lived experience and the value that students bring to the classroom. And that is something as educators that we can not just tap into, but really bring out of students and help to shape the learning resources that our students use today, but to really extend and perpetuate that for the future. And we see this as a real benefit to the future generations of students. So moving on, what this really does encompass in a very simple way is that it's not just about providing an environment where students have access to knowledge, it's about creating an environment where they can be knowledge creators. And I love this idea because when we see our students now as those who can create knowledge and create content, it really shifts that relationship. And that relationship really changes because it now really sort of disrupts the power balance in the classroom, which is a really good thing to have happen. And it allows us as instructors to lean on our students to recognize that they have just as much value to bring as we do, and that the knowledge they create will benefit future students, which is something that we should really be looking at doing in our positions. So moving on, why open pedagogy and why this whole idea of renewable assignments? So personally speaking, what really attracted me to, again, not just using an open resource, not just adapting an open resource, but to go that extra step and engage in open pedagogy, and to even seek out ways to create renewable resources and assignments in the classroom. The things that I really were drawn to were that this now became this instructor-student collaboration, right? So that relationship change was paramount for me. Using open pedagogy allowed me to find different ways to really activate students and to develop a much more engaging learning environment. The sage on the stage environment just never really showed me there was a lot of merit there and a lot of engagement. The kind of assignments that my students have engaged in and worked on has developed an enormous sense of pride in their work. I have seen students who would probably normally not be quite as engaged, be really very excited about the work that they've done, about the opportunity to publish their work, about the fact that their work would really set a legacy for themselves. And to be able to engage in projects like this at the first or second year undergraduate level is quite remarkable. I certainly don't remember being that excited about doing university work when I was 19 or 20 years old. But now I definitely see students who are really proud of the work they're doing and the opportunity to revise their work and to showcase their work to the world. What I love about some of the work that I've been doing in open pedagogy and creating renewable assignments for students is that there's great choice in expression. And this is really important for students because not everybody is going to want to follow the same assignment outline that you have created for whether you're teaching 30, 60, 90 200 students. There's often some great creativity that you can infuse in these assignments, where students now have a choice in how they might express the learning outcomes. So I have seen students develop traditional pieces of writing, to infographics, to videos, a range of expression that allows them to complete learning outcomes, but to also still participate in a really meaningful way, in a way that really reflects how they want to demonstrate their mastery of the content. One of the best benefits of working in open pedagogy, and in fact working with open resources, is that you give students this amazing opportunity to create relevant and updated content. From my experience in writing a consumer behavior open textbook, I have seen some of the ugliest, most outdated, sexist, racist, and completely misrepresentation of marketing through resources that are just really old, and they come from a perspective and a worldview that I can barely relate to, let alone most of my students. And now we can re-examine these through today's lens and say, what is wrong with these examples? And we can identify that these examples just don't work for students or for society today. They're outdated and they no longer are relevant. So students now have this opportunity to engage with open content and to be able to update content within a textbook, or even update things like a test bank, so that their lived experiences and who they are is more reflective in the resources and the materials that they're interacting with. I think this is a really powerful option. At the end of the day, there is tremendous opportunity to create learner-designed and learner-consumed resources. If we're asking our students to work with content, shouldn't that content really reflect part of their own experiences and perspectives on the world today? And I think these are, for me, some of the key drivers in going down this path. All right, so moving on, I will now share with you some of my open pedagogy practices. These are incomplete lists, and I'm still very much evolving as a practitioner and teaching and using open pedagogy in the classroom, but I'd like to share some of my favorites. And if you have questions around these, I'm happy to answer them, or if you would like to contact me for any of my assignment outlines, they're all CC licensed, so I can also share those with you. I can follow up with a list of links to these assignments. So here's some of the things I've done, and these have been some of my favorite works around open pedagogy. So in my consumer behavior course, where I've been working on an open textbook, one of the hardest things to do is to actually engage with students on material that you have written and created yourself that isn't complete. Actually, I'm going to say that's not just hard, it's a little terrifying, to be honest. And what I've done is created assignments where students have annotated their learning. I have handed over my incomplete textbook. I have used a free annotating tool called Hypothesis. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with it. And I've told students, have at it. Go ahead and tell me what is terrible about the textbook so far. As I said, this is rather terrifying. They can annotate it. They will often point out examples that are irrelevant to them. I remember there was a passage of examples that used a lot of companies that they had never even heard of before. So they changed up those examples and used ones that were more relevant to them as consumers. And then they summarized and wrote a reflection on their work. So this was an incredible, very powerful way for me to engage with students and to see how they were working with the content in the course. The second way in my consumer behavior course, where I've used open pedagogy with students, is to in fact have them author content. And I've done this by giving assignments around writing op-eds, opinion editorials, to really contextualize the context of the concepts and a lot of the themes and topics in our course. This is a course that's really rich in very advanced terms and vocabulary. And a lot of the time, the best way to learn concepts is to do this through marketing examples. So students have been provided a framework for how to write an op-ed, just as you would write one for a newspaper if you wanted to discuss important societal issues. So now students have been sort of armed with a framework. They've been given great practice in persuasive writing. And in doing this, they have actually written and authored quite a bit of content in the course. And I will showcase some of this for you. And the third example is in creating teachable content. One of the best ways I have found to engage with students is to let them be the teacher. Teach the content back to you and back to others. And there are some really exciting ways to do this, again, that provide this wonderful variety of expression. They can develop interactive content using things like H5P. And the wonderful thing about H5P is that if you are writing an open textbook or putting together open resources, H5P works really well with things like WordPress and Pressbooks, which is how my open content is being authored. And it's HTML interactive code that really can just sort of be dropped into your LMS and any web page that you're developing. So let's look at a few of these examples. We'll go on to the next slide. And the next slide is an example here, just a screenshot of the annotated learning assignment. So again, this is using Hypothesis as our annotating tool. And I have an assignment that is CC licensed should you be interested in trying this out. And in fact, another educator who's been involved with our open, the work that we do in the Open Education for a Better World program is somebody who I have attributed in helping me create this assignment. Our next slide here shows us some of the student op-eds. When you ask students to write about things that you think are important ways to share and discuss and contextualize context in your course, you have to be prepared for amazing work, because this is exactly what I have been faced with. Students have come back to say, I really want to talk about Colin Kaepernick and Take a Knee and what that means in terms of Nike's endorsement from a consumer behavior perspective. And it's incredible. I am so pleased to see the work that students bring to the classroom when you give them these opportunities. They want to talk about anti-racism. They want to bring into our course gender norms and discuss how gendered toys is a problem for creating these stereotypes within our society. They want to talk about how marketing has often very negative influence on self-esteem. So it's quite incredible the work that they create. And these are just screenshots and examples of some of the op-eds that students have created for my textbook. And it's a wonderful experience to be able to publish their work and attribute them, and to see future students now use their work to learn from them, but also to cite and attribute their students from a previous course. And then moving on, I have some screenshots here of H5P content. And H5P is a wonderful interactive tool and an opportunity to give students a really wide range of expression in creating their work. So I think at some point we all become quite tired of reading reports and essays and it becomes quite cumbersome to go through all of that content. Well, I have students who have created some really remarkable pieces of work that future students have had a chance to interact with and learn from. So looking at, for example, these are screenshots of an H5P timeline where the user would scroll through and look at some of the most important major events that have shaped the lives of millennials and how this changes them as consumers today. You know, this is very visual work. It has important key information provided in it, but it's just such a more engaging way for students to interact with content. And in addition to that, if we look at the next slide here, there's a few more examples of what H5P content can look like in an open textbook, such as the one that we're putting together. I have a group of students who created a cross-cultural perspectives on color to really highlight how colors have different meaning in different cultures around the world. And although they have focused on 3 regions, North America, China, and India, the wonderful thing about this content is that, of course, H5P is reusable, so future students can now build on this. It would be wonderful to have students tell us what different colors mean in South Africa. We don't have this on our map, but this would provide great added contextualized meanings and examples from different parts of the world. And so as marketers who play and work with colors and use color to create symbols and meaning in their products, it would be really helpful to understand how the color red or yellow are interpreted differently across different cultures. Additionally, there's some screenshots here to show how students have used H5P to create content that brings things, topics that are, relevant to students. For example, in this second image, we have students who have created a fictional persona of a young college basketball player, and used an Instagram profile to showcase how the consumer preferences that this persona might have. And then we also have in our third image here a really fun comparison. This really came out of the whole "Okay Boomer" meme that was traveling around the internet some time ago, where boomers versus zoomers, looking at how the tension between boomers and millennials. And this really plays on how consumer decisions are made so differently between those different consumer groups. So then moving on to our next slide, I'd like to spend a few minutes here talking about my latest project. And this is in a 4th year undergrad marketing course. In fact, I've just finished teaching this summer, so it's very fresh. And this is an open pedagogy project that excites me probably more than anything. Not that I have a favorite child in the mix of all of this, but this is certainly a really wonderful project. And this is a course where we don't have a textbook, we don't have resources. This is a final course that students are taking before they are graduating and entering the working world as marketers. And so in this course, I decided, probably more ambitious than I've ever decided before, but students would create an OER. They would actually write the textbook. So no textbook, no problem. Why not have students actually put that content together? So this is what we spent the summer doing. And then why not frame this a little bit more and give more focus to this project? Not just write any textbook, but in fact, why not write a guide that would be open licensed? We have a Pressbooks platform at our university, so it would be created in Pressbooks, which is very similar as a working platform to WordPress. And why not introduce students to using open tools and resources? And this required them to learn how to do research, open research, the way many of us educators are doing it. And this guide was then tailored to specifically meet the needs of those who have the fewest marketing dollars and the least number of marketing resources at their disposal. So this guide is dedicated to activists, advocates, advocacy groups, not-for-profits or NGOs, all of those boots on the ground organizations who are doing the work around the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the small organizations worldwide who are working to end poverty, to achieve gender equality, to bring clean water to communities. And so this open guide is dedicated to those who can't hire fancy agencies and expensive marketing consultants, and to help demystify what it is to create marketing programs and marketing campaigns, and to really center this around some of the wonderful anti-racism examples that we see in today's activist groups and activism campaigns. So I told you it would be ambitious, didn't I? So this is the final product. I have 34 students who created the Open Guide to Integrated Marketing Communications. This is a how-to guide for creating marketing campaigns. The students entered this course. I had a mix of students who were marketing students, but also graphic design students, which was a wonderful bonus because our design students provided the look and feel and an entire style guide for the textbook, which was wonderful. And students here were developing some really important skills, life skills, how to engage in open research, how to understand and work with the open commons and around licensing, what all the different open licensing means, and then how to author and share content. So this was an incredible, rich learning experience for them, especially because every single student coming into this course had never even heard of open before. This was new to them. Okay, so let's look at the next slide here. What is really to gain from doing a project like this? I call it a legacy of learning. There's so much that students have gained from this as learners, as authors, as content creators, but they have now already put into motion a legacy of learning for future students who will interact with this content, who will read it, who will adapt it, revise it, update it, all the things that we do in interacting with open content. So this shows us how student work can become much more practical, relevant, renewable, and relatable. Just as a side note, I received an email yesterday from one of my colleagues who said, I'm teaching a course this fall for the first time. It is an applied communication course that looks at design work, design communications. Do you have any resources on personas? And I just kind of laughed and said, actually, my students wrote a textbook this summer and did a whole chapter on personas. And I sent the link to my colleague, and he just about fell off his chair and said, oh my gosh, I'm using this textbook for my fall course. And it's already being adapted, which is shockingly fast, but it's a wonderful sort of wheels in motion benefit that we see from creating open resources that we can support others, not just learners, but also instructors in a case like this. Moving on to the next slide here, there's a few links that I invite you to check out on your own time here. We have here a guide to making open textbooks with students. So I think this is a wonderful resource to use, some great examples and how-tos. So as practitioners, you might enjoy going through this and getting some new ideas and looking at how do I make this happen for myself, for my students, if you want to take on a project like this. I will say one of the other features that I found really important in creating open content here is it also gave students the opportunity to apply an accessibility toolkit to the open guide. So this is really important in creating open content. We want to make sure that it is not just open, but it's also accessible for learners who would otherwise face barriers in interacting with the content. So everything from things like font size to using alt text to ensure that photos are read to an audience who might have visual impairment barriers, making sure that color contrasts are all done appropriately so that your materials that you're creating and your students are creating are fully accessible. And my students were very excited to learn about how to make their work more accessible, and they applied the accessibility toolkit to their open guide. So now it can also be recognized as an open and accessible resource. So I would just add that sort of as a footnote to your open project if you go down this path. Okay, moving on to our next slide here. We also have a wonderful resource in the Open Pedagogy Notebook, and my mentor, friend, and advisor who I've been working under, Rajiv Janjiani at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, has helped author this Open Pedagogy Notebook, as have a number of well-known open advocates and educators. So this gives you some really great ideas going beyond the examples I've provided in how to create some of these sharing practices with students. Everything from like the collaborative syllabus to working, having students work on assessments. There's so many wonderful examples here that, that we can all draw from. And then my final slides, you'll see, there that are just some attributions and some citations there. And this concludes the presentation on open pedagogy. I'm happy to share any future links. If you wish to contact me, please don't hesitate to do that. And I hope this will be helpful and inspiring, and anyone who would like to start their own open pedagogy project.
Well, can I be the first to say what a wonderful contribution to our series, and thank you, Andrea. Your work is truly inspiring and super motivational as well for our efforts here at Nelson Mandela University. I think that we have an opportunity now for some questions. If there's anyone, you are more than welcome to switch your camera on right now and maybe direct a question in person. Delenza has her hand up. Would you like to pose a question?
Hi, Dino. I'm not going to put the video on just in the interest of the connection, the quality of the connection. Thanks so much for the presentation. I really found it very interesting, and it really extended my understanding of the concept of OER. Just from my side, sometimes what one finds is that students are under tremendous pressure to cope with the courses that they registered for. And for me, I'm in the engineering faculty, and students sometimes get into the mode of just surviving, let's say, whatever it is that they need to pass. And I was just wondering, in terms of embarking on a project like this, where students need to contribute to writing the course material, what would be possible strategies to overcome that sort of influence on the students in terms of their ability to contribute?
This is a great question. I'm an advocate for providing students different opportunities to express their learning. So I don't think that there should only be one path for them to go down in a course. And what I have done in all of my assignments with students is given them different options. So the last thing students need is some added pressure or stress or barriers to learning. So for example, if we look at the H5P examples, these are options I've given students, but a lot of students have not used H5P in creating their work. They may have used something that they're more comfortable with, such as PowerPoint, or even just done some writing in Word, for example. But giving those options and opening up these channels and these opportunities, some students will say, actually, that is a path I'd like to go down and develop some new skills. So for me, I've found that giving a range of options for students to be more effective than to merely just sort of demand that they work in you know, doing only having one option here, that will then create more stress and not really achieve a very good learning experience for students, or an effective one. So I find that that's a way that you can minimize some of the stress, to be honest. Not really forcing students into a corner is another way of saying it. I have found, however, that providing open content to students has also reduced a lot of stress. So even just being able for students to come into a classroom. Now I understand education it costs differently all over the world. So in the context where I work, students pay quite a bit for tuition. Most of my students work multiple jobs, shift work, and they have a lot of financial demands on their life. They don't necessarily come from wealth. So being able to be in a classroom where they don't have to pay for any additional resources. So in our learning environment, students are often having to pay a few $100s each for each course, to purchase textbooks and to purchase various learning materials. So there is sort of a great alleviation to stress by working with Open. And in fact, having students become part of the content creators also helps them to find a better way to interact with the content, as opposed to, again, having to just purchase and consume content. When you bring them into the classroom and say, okay, well, now let's create some of the content that future learners can access for free and continue to evolve, that seems to work really well for students. And in my experience, they've had a richer and better learning experience because of that. So it's alleviated some of those stresses. But I think there's an important balance there as an educator that we need to strike.
Thank you, Andrea. I see that Prof. Jaco Olivier, who's from Northwest University here in South Africa, has a comment. And in the interest of expediting the conversation, Andrea, do you maybe have any inputs about any research being done on the student experience of engaging with Open?
We actually have, I personally am not conducting specific research studies on their experience, but I fortunately have a really robust open education department and group within our university. And I have a colleague who is a research fellow who is in fact doing this right now and engaging in a study around student experience in open education. So my students will be participating in that research study. Anecdotally speaking, of course, I gather information and experiences and feedback from students through various means. But one of the best ways I have found to really sort of gather for my own interests, because what I'm really focused on is how can I make this experience better, more meaningful, deeper, richer, is have students to create portfolios at the end of the course to share their learning experiences. So in the course that I've just shown you here, where they've created this OER, they have also created e-portfolios. Many of the students, in fact, open licensed they CC licensed their portfolios, and they have shared what their learning experiences have been and what that whole process has been like. So anecdotally speaking, it's been wonderful to see students reflect on that and to be able to point specifically to what they've learned and where they see this learning taking them in the future.
Thank you so much. Prof. Olivier is actually going to be one of our presenters in another one of these sessions that will be happening in a couple of weeks, actually. Next week, I'll be taking over and presenting on the OpenEdInfluencers initiative at Nelson Mandela University. But wider than that is also sort of carrying on with some of the efforts like Andrea has been engaging in with empowering advocacy efforts and actual engagement from the students themselves. Yeah, at Nelson Mandela University, the Open Education Influencers is actually a project that is not just about awareness and engagement with open, but also about accumulating or empowering students with professional skills and experiences. They leave there with the ability to go out and advocate for open, which is something that seems to be gaining traction all over the world in terms of flipping the classroom. So it's quite encouraging to see that the practice that Andrea is engaged in, and to see the actual results and the products that come out of those as resources, which are again CC licensed. For those of you who are not aware, CC licenses mean Creative Commons license. You can go to creativecommons.org and engage with the 6 varieties of open licenses, which goes from completely open to open with some conditions, including restrictions on use for commercial purposes, if that's not what you want others to do, or completely open. Are there any other questions, perhaps?
Gino?
Yes, Shan.
I'm quite interested. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I'm quite interested in the idea of having different responses to an assignment, not necessarily having to be a seminar report or a scientific report or a scientific post or whatever, allowing the creativity of the students to react in their own creative way, obviously within some sort of structure. But I'm interested in whether Andrea has had any well, I suppose you have had interaction with the sciences and what their reaction, the Faculty of Sciences, and what their reaction is to your ideas.
Well, I'm trying to draw on any specific examples. I don't have anything specific, but I do at our university, we do have quite a number of faculty from different areas within the sciences who work in open pedagogy and creating OERs. So I think from their experiences, what I have seen is a range in having students annotate work, having students create content in the forms of different examples, contextualizing perhaps different content and examples to fit within the topic that is being studied. I'm sorry, I don't have any very specific examples, but I know that there's a number of really wonderful faculty at our university from really across different disciplines who are working in open pedagogy, and everything from thinking of colleagues from environmental sciences, food sciences, some in mathematics, areas where they've been working with OERs. So I feel like other instructors would be better to speak to that. I'm so sorry I don't have a specific example, but in giving this presentation, I will say my colleague and I give this presentation on open pedagogy a few times a year at our university. So naturally we have faculty from all over the institution attending. And there's always a lot of excitement and curiosity. And usually the first, barrier is, how do I get started? And so we often will do quite a bit of brainstorming. So one of the best ways to do that is to take an assignment that you have, maybe one where you see an opportunity to really sort of open up and widen the expressions of learning, and to brainstorm with others, you know, how could these learning outcomes, learning objectives be achieved in different ways? I would also recommend, if you haven't had an opportunity yet, to look up universal design for learning. I'm not sure if that's an area that there's a lot of focus in, or if you're familiar with it, but UDL is offers, and this is where the expression of learning comes from, offers these, you know, recognizing the importance of allowing students these different ways to express their learning and to demonstrate that they've mastered learning outcomes. So this is, I'm really borrowing the expression of learning from the world of Universal Design for Learning, UDL. That's another area where we're very fortunate at our university. We have a number of experts in this area who are really teaching us faculty how to support learners in the classroom who are able to demonstrate that they have mastered the course, but not necessarily in the way that we as instructors have always designed it. So that might be a nice thing to do, is spend a little time looking up UDL. And then I would brainstorm, pick an assignment, do some brainstorming around how could I open this up and provide different channels of expression. And it might even be a collaborative discussion with students. In fact, you might find in talking with students that they might have some ideas, and that might really invite them into that creation process. I do have colleagues who will actually begin the course without really having the assignments fully formed, which is also a terrifying thought to me. And they will work with students to say, how do we want to create these assignments, and how do we want to, what does the work look like? And sort of hand that control over to students. So that might be another option. I would just take the steps you feel most comfortable with and that are more sort of most realistic with the learning objectives in your course.
Thank you, Andrea.
I think just something from our university side to say is that now that we've got sort of a reshaping of our student and academic support for learning and teaching, there's instructional design support now available also in what was previously seen as or titled graphic design. We now have instructional designers who are able to, I think, share some of their experience and their capabilities of looking at the user experiences and UDL, as Andrea's just spoken about. So it is something that I think we start to engage with internally within the institution, while we also look further outside of our own space to sort of bring in some other experience and abilities so that we enrich what we have to offer in terms of support here at our institution. I do want to also share that Prof. Olivier will be presenting his session on the 23rd, and I'm putting the title into the chat window. It is localizing open educational resources and promoting multilingualism through open education. So in terms of what Andrea was discussing about the Sustainable Development Goals, bringing quality education for all is SDG number 4. Andrea is also a member of the UNESCO Open Education for a Better World project or program, which is where we have been engaging in for the last 2 years with the Becoming an Open Education Influencer project ourselves. Prof. Olivier is a UNESCO chair in open and multimodal learning, if I'm not mistaken. So please do diarize his session coming up in 2 weeks' time as well, 3 weeks' time, because I think it's something equally as relevant as what we've just been engaging in with Andrea. Are there any additional questions or comments? Andrea, would you like to perhaps, if you have a final few words for the group?
Sure, I would love to. Um, well, thank you so much for having me. I apologize for those early technical glitches here on my end, and the fact that I'm sitting in the dark whispering so I don't wake the family. But it's been a real pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to speak about this topic and to follow up with anyone if you have any questions. I'd also like to just say that one of the really wonderful things about going down this path is that you start to see a lot of complementary areas that really come into the fold. So areas that are really important to me as an educator in working in open has really brought in, you know, the meaningful work around the Sustainable Development Goals. It has brought in universal design for learning, so really understanding UDL. And it has layered in aspects of decolonization, which are a pivotal part of our unlearning experiences where we are situated in the world, and looking at opportunities for greater indigenization of our content, as well as looking at aspects of anti-racism that can be brought into our work. And so what we find as educators in this space is that these aren't actually different conversations anymore. These are part of the same conversation. And it really centers on our students, their learning experiences, the relationships that we build with them, and then what they take away and out of the classroom after they leave us. And this is a really profound time in their life, and the impact that we have as educators is one that has a lasting effect, and we can really choose what kind of experience we want them to have. And in layering all of these together, because really none of them exist in isolation, these are all conversations and experiences that come together. I will say that I have found so much more joy in the work that I do, so much more passion. And I see students who are benefiting from some of these hard conversations, but also benefiting from the opportunity to bring their own lived experiences to the classroom and to feel valued as a student and a learner. And that is really made for a much more sort of healthier and wholesome experience. So I would encourage you in going down these different paths to really look and find the opportunities to layer in all of these different themes, pedagogies, experiences, and relationships with students. It evolves us as educators, and it really supports, I think, a real lifelong learning for our students as well. So thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful, inspiring, or even just a little bit interesting is fine as well. And I look forward to any questions, emails, even months down the road. I will be happy to engage and support your open pedagogy and open practices. Thank you, Gino, for having me today.
We'd just like to repeat the thanks. I see that our director of the LT Collab, Mr. Dave Jenkins, is here as well. So I'm sure that I echo everyone who's present by saying this was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And thank you so much for the wonderful work you do for others and that you've shared with us today. As we wrap up this session, I'd like to say thanks to all of you for attending. Note that this is now a weekly occurrence until the end of October. We will have some amazing additional speakers and inputs from practitioners from all over the world. And also in South Africa, because like Andrea says, it's important for us to infuse things that are relevant to our own students and to their experiences into the curriculum. So a final message of stay well, stay safe from the OpenEdInfluencers here at Nelson Mandela University. And we'd like to bid you all a fond farewell for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina.